everyone. Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back here with another client interview for you guys. Today we got Christian on with us. Christian is one of the smartest guys that we've worked with, I want to say. And he came up with some cool stuff throughout the recruiting process and shared it with our entire community. And I know a lot of people benefited from Christian being in our program. And so anyway, that was amazing. But Christian, has been working with us since like late January. It's mid-June now as the time of this recording, but he was able to get his offer back in mid-April, about 2.5 months into his time in this program. And so, I wanted to get on here to just kind of like talk to you guys. He also doesn't have like the typical finance background that a lot of students have when they're going for investment banking. So I think for a lot of you who are maybe in a similar situation, like you're not necessarily studying finance in school and whatnot, I think this will be a very informative episode for you guys. So anyway, I think rather than me kind of introducing you, Christian, I'm going to kick it over to you and maybe have you introduce yourself, because I'm sure you'll do a better job, but like kind of walk us through, I guess to start like kind of like what's your background, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So I'm Christian. I am a rising junior at the University of Southern California. And like Sam said, I'm not like the traditional finance background student. I study astronautical engineering, which is very different. And, I didn't really know anything about investment banking when I got to college. I took a gap year right after my freshman year during COVID. And that's kind of when I found out about it. And by that time, I had sort of figured out that engineering wasn't quite where I wanted to take my career. However, I kept it as my major just because I found it really interesting. And I thought that studying technical things is always worthwhile. And you can always go less technical, but you can never go more. And then during that gap year, I started a web development company, built some websites for some local companies. In that, I sort of realized that thinking about how companies work was kind of interesting because I was trying to do it myself. And I got back to school in August of 2021 and started thinking about finance. I joined a private equity firm as an intern. And then right around probably like November, October, I was thinking about banking. I had talked to some people who had just gone through the cycle because I was the same age as all my friends who had gone through the cycle, but I'm a year younger in terms of tenure. So I could sort of listen to their experiences and hear about it and realize it was great. Really, really helpful for that. And I had realized this is like an interesting career path. And so a lot of my friends didn't go to my school. I went to high school in Georgia and a lot of them go to Georgia Tech. So I was just talking to them there. And I met a couple kids in my school and I joined my school's investing clubs, but I was trying to figure out how to go about doing recruiting, and I sort of stumbled on Wall Street Mastermind. But I don't know, Sam, you can sort of tell me where I could go from here. I guess that was the intro.
Yeah. To start, what was the outcome of your recruiting process then? Because we already alluded to this, but like it only took you probably 2.5 months. So it was like a very quick process for you, right?
Yeah.
Where are you going to be going?
I'm going to Citi for their tech team in San Francisco, working investment banking. Yeah.
Cool. So that's a good team, by the way. But so up to that point in like late January when you joined Wall Street Mastermind, like had you done anything as far as recruiting goes? Because by late January of sophomore year, if I think back on all the applications and stuff, like a bunch of them were already open, right?
Yeah.
So like, had you been like applying and networking and prepping for interviews already, or like were you just kind of like starting from scratch?
So no, like I don't know. So I was doing a little bit. I had talked to some people. One of my friends who I was listening to a lot, he did equity research at Goldman, so I realized I shouldn't have been listening to him as much because he was doing something different. But he told me that it was like too early to start networking in like November, which I think is wrong now. But so I wasn't really thinking about networking. He was just like, I was really listening to him. He was like, don't network, just focus on studying. And what I found really difficult, and maybe some people could sort of identify with this, is that although it's true that lots of information exists about a process like investment banking recruiting because it's so structured and very popular. There's a lot of information, but the difficult part as an individual, particularly an individual who doesn't study something like this, just to learn it, it's difficult to parse between relevant and irrelevant information. Because you read these guides, right? And you can get all the PDFs online, right? There's thousands of pages and it's cool and it's interesting, but you don't necessarily know like what is actually relevant. And so that was my like really big issues, because I knew that people would expect me to be fluent with numbers, and that's fine. I have no issue demonstrating that, but I had to understand the concepts behind the numbers that I was working with, and I didn't know how to do that. And I ended up actually realizing that my sister, I have a twin sister who's studying business at USC. She ended up later on in the cycle doing PE recruiting and has an offer from a mega fund now. And she was asking me about some concepts and I knew the answers and she didn't. And this is what she's studying, which is pretty interesting after going through the program and everything. But yeah, that was up into the program. I wasn't doing much. I was trying to figure out technicals and I was having a hard time doing it on my own.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So that's a really interesting point I want to ask you about, because I think you're right. There's like, I think in this day and age, it's not like people always like, well, all the information is out there, right? I mean, like, shoot, you have Google. I mean, like, what can you not find on Google, right? Technically, but like, I think like maybe 20 years ago, having information might actually be an edge, whereas today, having information alone is not an edge because it's been democratized and everyone has technically access to the same information, right? For the most part. But then the question becomes like, how do you know what's good information and has bad information? And like, to your point, there's almost like too much information.
There's way too much, yeah.
And even going on a place like Google, this is why this always cracks me up when people was like, well, everything's already on Google. It's like, well, to go on Google, you need to know like the right questions to ask, right? Like you have to type in something, right? And then like, so if you don't know the right questions to ask, Google's not going to lead you to the right answers. And then the second thing is like, we've all experienced this, right? Like even when you type in whatever question you have to Google, then what happens? They give you like hundreds of search results or thousands of search results. And you probably just open like the first 5 to 10, because those are what Google says is most relevant. And then you look through them and then you're like, okay, these all like still doesn't make sense still, or maybe they say slightly different things or whatever. It's just like, it's a very, it can be a very tedious process and sometimes just not very fruitful, right? At least that's like my experience and a lot of the experience that other students have had.
Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was gonna say, like, to your point, like, it's no longer about having the information, but it's like, how do you get the right information? And not only that, how do you get that in less time than your competition? Because, I mean, we'll probably talk about this later, but like when you're going through recruiting, like there's a lot of urgency to everything you're doing, right? And that's actually where the competitive advantage is like, can you get to the right information sooner? And then can you like implement it faster, essentially, right? Oh, I don't know what you were going to say, but.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, I think an analogy that I sort of thought about or while you were talking is like, I think it would be akin to if somebody handed you a textbook of 1,000 pages and then didn't tell you which 10 you needed to know. And you could just read the whole thing and memorize it all or understand it all. And you could do that, but it would take a lot of time and you wouldn't need to know 90% of it. And that's sort of how it feels. And that's actually how it is, I think. Like me reading through all of those guides while I was studying technicals, like I know which questions to skip because I'm not going to see them, stuff like that.
That's a good point. Okay. So then you like found Wall Street Mastermind. I guess like that, my next question was going to be like, what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind then? Because like, sure, okay, Google's not like the most effective way to go about it, but there are so many choices and options that you could have had, right? And Wall Street Mastermind being just one of them. So like, what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind? And then also like, I don't know if you remember, but like can you walk us through kind of like your mindset at the time? Like, were you skeptical at all? Were you worried that whether this was going to work or not? Or like, I don't know, just like, what was your thought process? And then like, ultimately, why did you decide to do it?
So I think I ended up thinking more about Wall Street Mastermind because a couple months ago in the summer, just a few months before, so the summer right before, I listened to your podcast on Spotify, and I had no idea who you were, right? It's just like a voice and someone talking about recruiting.
Yeah.
And then I came back across it. I was like, oh, I think this was the podcast that I listened to.
Yeah.
And someone that I trusted had said good things about the program. And so it made me think about it more. And I talked to Sam. And, I mean, you remember I asked you to talk to a bunch of former students.
Yeah.
Because I was certainly skeptical, but also a big issue is that like my parents were quite skeptical, and I'm fortunate enough to have them help me financially. So, I was trying to reason with them through the best way to make this decision. And yeah, healthy skepticism is important because people have lots of reasons to take other people's money and not be honest. But yeah, I didn't think that was the case. And after talking to some of the students that you put me in contact with, as well as just thinking about why I wanted help and why I think it was the correct decision to seek help. I realized, like I said, that I didn't have the ability to sort through which information was relevant, as well as like the definition of ignorance, right? Like you don't know what you don't know. I didn't know what else I was missing. I knew what I didn't know, but I didn't know what else I was missing. And I thought that it would be helpful. And in terms of just like a financial decision, it didn't really seem like a particularly difficult one just because of the potential upside of banking. Yeah. So it was really just more so a credibility question rather than a financial one. And after, Wall Street Mastermind's got good Trustpilot reviews and talking to the former people, and as well as, like I said, someone I trusted said good things about the program, they kind of made me go ahead with it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like basically you have a healthy amount of skepticism, which I agree that's like very important. But like, I think the definition of healthy is also like having the ability to think critically for yourself and also like actually do the due diligence that's necessary to get to the bottom of it and to get to the truth, as opposed, because like, I mean, let's be honest, there are a lot of people online that will say that Wall Street Mastermind is a total scam, right?
Yeah,
of course. Yeah, and of course we have a lot of students that have gone through the program that says Wall Street Mastermind is amazing, and so it's almost like politics, where you have Democrats and Republicans, and both sides says the other side is lying. And how do you decide who's telling the truth? And it's just like ultimately, you have to be able to sift through all of that, and make a decision for yourself that you think is best for you, right? Something you mentioned that's interesting though that I want to ask you about too, because I think a lot of other students that talk to us and end up really wanting to work with us. I would say actually like more often than not, that's the case. After someone talks to us and like really learns what the program is about, it's like, oh wow, I didn't know like something like this was available. And I mean, why would you not want this? But a lot of times the hurdle is like overcoming the skeptical parents, because then they have to go and talk to mom and dad, and mom and dad are like, I don't know what the heck this thing is. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, are you being scammed? Whatever. So like, how were you able to, I guess, overcome that and convince them? And then I guess like a related question to that, which I thought was interesting too, because you mentioned earlier you have a twin sister who also recruited for finance, and she's ultimately ended up at a mega fund. And obviously she didn't use our program, right? So she was doing it on her own. And so I feel like I'm just putting myself in your parents' shoes, where I could see a lot of parents in that situation just be like, yeah, your sister's doing it on her own. Like, so why do you need this? Or like, why don't you just get help from your sister as opposed to getting help from Wall Street Mastermind? So like, can you like kind of walk through how that all went down? And like, I mean, was that easy or difficult? Or, I mean, what did you have to do?
Right. No, it was quite difficult. So the first point regarding my sister actually didn't start recruiting till after I got my offer. And I think that because she didn't know, I think what happened was she saw I got my offer, and then she realized that I was a credible source of information. and then started asking me questions about mega fund recruiting because it's, related, quite similar actually. And then I was telling her like, you have to get on this, like it's gonna end soon, if you want to do this. And then she was like, oh shit, okay, I'll go do that. And then she was like grinding a lot, and then she was hitting a bunch of frustrations because she didn't know what technicals to study and she didn't know like what to do. So I like just said, here's the knowledge that I have. I'll help you as much as I can, but I don't know as mega fund specific stuff. You just got to Google around and hope you get the right stuff. I guess it ended up working out, and they all liked her. She got her offer, which is great. But yeah, no. So the way that it was with my parents, my dad has worked in the corporate world his whole life, and he was skeptical because he had the way that he thought that something like helping get a job, like headhunting kind of worked, was he had heard, or at least maybe he'd experienced it, I don't even know, is that they get a percentage of your salary or a bonus when you sign. So he thought that it was weird that there was just like a fee and that was it, rather than you secure a job and you get paid when you secure a job, because that's how headhunting works, right? So he was confused, and my mom didn't know anything about banking or recruiting. And my dad had, he's 30 something years older than me. He thought that it was weird that I was doing it so early. But I talked to them and I explained to them this is what's going on, and my mom just said, whatever your dad decides, because she trusted his judgment. And I had to really talk to my dad about, like you said, the due diligence, right? He told me, go figure out what the other options are. Go to your school. My school said no to me because I'm not a business major. They wouldn't help me. USC has, they have an investment banking specific advisor. I don't actually know how useful he is. And I went in there to try to talk to him, and they told me that I'm not allowed to go in. I was not able to use any of the business school's resources because I wasn't a business student, which was super, yeah. And my dad was very angry about that because of, he's paying tuition. My dad's an alumni of USC, right? He was pissed. And so, I went and looked around at there. I couldn't, there's not a ton of options. I found a few, but I just told him that, I am willing to pay him back, and if he trusts my judgment, then I want to go ahead with this. Given the fact that I talked to former students, Sam talked to my dad, and. It was less so the fact that it was less so the fact of just Wall Street Mastermind. It was more so the fact of like this concept of paying someone to, instruct you, right? They're like, this is what I'm paying your tuition for, or like this, you don't do this to get a job. That's not a thing, right? This is kind of like a foreign concept. I think that was really the main issue to explaining why I don't know anything and I need help. Rather than more so like a credibility question. So for me, it was more a credibility question because I knew that this was going on and I had to learn. For them, it was, that was part of it, but it was more so trying to explain to them that banking recruiting is happening quickly. I need to know all these things. This program has a very, very high success rate, and it's something I'm interested in, and it's something that I trust. And if they trust me, then, we can go ahead. And that's kind of how I went about it, trying to just be open. And, they made several requests in terms of like, go figure out the other options, let me talk to them, go talk to other students. And I did all of that just really be thorough with figuring out credibility and going from there.
Yeah. That's really cool actually, because I feel like it sounds like you and your dad, you guys just have like a very healthy way of communicating. Like it wasn't easy by any means, but like you can make your points. He actually listened. He has some demands that he wanted you to do. You went and did those things. And bottom line is like, this is a very foreign concept to them, as it usually is for most parents. But your dad was like open-minded about it. And also he kind of like ultimately decided to trust your judgment. Whereas like I've encountered a lot of parents that are not open-minded, because a lot of parents, it's easy for them to think like, I'm your parent, I know best, right? And you don't know what you're talking about. Even though 9 out of 10 times, I would say 99% of the time, the student knows more about investment banking recruiting than the parent, because they're the ones that are actually going through it, right? But it's easy for parents to just assume that they know best. And then also I think, to your point, and to your parents' credit, like this concept of like, by the way, like executive coaching is very common at like the senior levels.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
But like at the junior entry level that we're talking about, where people are just trying to get entry level jobs, it is not a common thing yet, right? I actually personally believe that someday it will be a common thing, just because, I mean, just like you think about it, like college admissions consulting, MBA admissions consulting, like all these things are like similar things, and they're like becoming more and more prevalent. And it's just like any type of school or job or thing that's like highly desirable and very selective, and a lot of people are trying to get into it. People are always going to be looking for that edge.
Right.
And, 10 years ago, memorizing the MNI 400 questions guide gave you that edge. Like that made you ahead of the curve. Today, memorizing the MNI 400 questions guide doesn't do anything. It's what everyone else is also doing already, right? So like, I do think that will change, but like, at least as of today, yeah, you're right. It's a completely foreign concept. They don't know how early recruiting starts. They don't know, like, a lot of parents, I'm not saying yours, but a lot of parents also don't know like all the benefits of starting your career in investment banking. So they don't see what the big deal is. They don't know the degree of difficulty. They don't know the acceptance rates. They don't know any of these things. And so like, to your point, I think the onus is actually on you to communicate all these things to them in an effective manner to help them understand and to educate them on like why this is important to you, right? And I think like the reason why I'm spending time talking about this is like, I know for a fact that there are going to be a lot of students that are listening to this. They're going to end up in the same boat, and they're not going to know what to do.
Yeah. I also had to explain to them why I wanted to do banking, because I'm an engineer, and they're like, what do you never said you wanted to do this. Why you want to go try it? Whatever. I had to explain. And basically what I just said was, okay, worst case, I figure out I hate it and I make a bunch of money and pay you guys back. Best case, I have a great career. So I want to try it.
Yeah.
And and then that seemed relatively convincing.
Yeah, offering to pay them back always helps, right? But I mean, to be fair, like, investment banking summer internships pay a lot, right? They probably make, on a low end, I would say $20,000 over the summer. On the high end, I've heard of like $40,000+ for a summer. So it's like, you can pay for this program many, many times over, as long as you get the offer, right? So I guess let's talk a bit about, okay, so you convinced your parents to let you join the program. You came in, like I said, in end of January, and then it took you about 2.5 months to land your offer. Walk us through those 2.5 months. Like, what were you doing once you got into the program? What were like the things that you were working on? And then like, what did you find to be the most helpful, I guess? Because like, were there anything that in hindsight, now that you've been through it, because you probably didn't know for sure back then, but now that you're on the other side, were there things that you did in the program that you're like, you know what, I could not have done this on my own, or I could not have done it to this degree?
Yeah, sure. So I guess first, just sort of high level what I did. Obviously, I was doing a full engineering course load and school and whatever. So really just like putting as much time as I could, trying to just move through all of the content in terms of how it's structured. But yeah, I mean, I think that the two most helpful things that I found were networking and behaviorals. And I don't think that people, and I think there's a strong emphasis on the behaviorals, because I don't think that people actually think about those very much. But I found, especially as the banker becomes more senior that you talk to about interviews, they always say that behaviorals matter way more. And, for instance, right, I was, the GS TMT Super Day, I wasn't asked a single technical question. It was only behaviorals, and it was like wild, wacky behaviorals that you can't study for. It was weird stuff. And I think so like having the right mindset and frameworks to think about how to answer behavioral questions, as well as guidance on how to go about networking, that hopefully I've contributed to a little bit.
You definitely did.
Is really important, because it's like networking is the cheat code, and behaviorals or people want to work with who they like. So if people like you, they want to work with you, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably what I think were the two most like beneficial, and like the technicals were great, right? They're it's useful. The content is good. It explains through. It's thorough. You can go back, you can go back and look at it. And as long as you understand the content, you can get asked whatever questions you want. But in my experience, I've found that if people like you, they're way more chill about what technicals they ask you, right? They're going to be less mean. But secondly, if like, let's say they ask you in one of my city interviews in my first round, it was like 80% technical, which was odd, I thought, because it's not like historically like that. And he asked me a question. And I guess I just didn't. It's not that he didn't know how to answer it. I don't think I really understood what he was trying to ask. And I asked him, he's like, yeah, that's right. And he's just like, okay, but consider this part, right? And he was really nice about it. And I mean, I guess it wasn't an issue because I moved on. I would say those are probably the two things I found really helpful.
Yeah, I think a couple thoughts there. First of all, for someone like you, you're an astronomical engineer. Like, I suspect learning investment banking technicals, it's not going to be like the hardest thing for you. It's just like, compared to some of the math classes and whatever you have to take in school, it's just like, okay, yeah, I got, like, you probably didn't have to study it too many times. You just like picked it up, right? I mean, you need to learn it, but like this, I would never expect that to be a difficult thing for you. But to your point, more importantly, I absolutely agree that I think the reason why so many students think that there's so much emphasis placed on the technical prep for the investment and recruiting process, because all the companies out there that are selling stuff for investment banking recruiting, they're selling financial modeling courses or like technical interview guides, right? And the reason why they're doing that though is because it's easier to create a course or a guide on the technical interview, because like the answers are very black and white, and like you're teaching like actual concepts that don't change, right? From person to person. That's why they're doing that. But because that's what's easier for them to sell, they've also kind of like indoctrinated the market to believe like, oh, this is the most important thing. Like, oh, if you learn how to build a financial model, this is what's going to get you a job at Goldman Sachs. And then they don't tell you like, oh, actually Goldman Sachs, the entire interview is all behavioral, like in your experience, right? And for people that don't know, like Goldman Sachs, like their interview actually is known to be way more behavioral. Like they just don't care that much about the technical stuff. They want to know if you are like Goldman material or whatever they put, right? But also like to your point too, like if people ultimately like what interviewing is about is like, how do you make the other person like you?
Yep.
And whether the other person likes you or not, it comes down way more. It has way more to do with your behaviorals and your technicals.
Yeah.
And if someone does like you said, they'll cut you a lot more slack with like, you can make a mistake here and there on your technical. I mean, you can't be like horrible, but like, you don't have to be perfect. Right. Yep. But I've never seen it the other way around where, oh, someone is like a technical whiz, but they're super boring, or like their story sucks. And then they're like, oh yeah, we're going to hire this guy just because he's really good at doing DCFs. Like said no one ever, right? So so I know those are good points. I guess on the behavioral side though, I think the other reason why people don't put as much emphasis on it is because most people, they can feel the lack of knowledge that they have on the technical side, and it's very obvious and apparent.
Yes.
But on the behavioral side, that's not so obvious, right? Because even prior to coming into the program, I mean, let's be honest, like if I said, hey, Christian, tell me about yourself. Yeah. Like you probably feel like, yeah, I have at least a decent, if not great answer for that question. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I feel like a lot of people don't feel like they need help on the behavioral aspect of the interviews. Yep. I'm not sure if that's how you felt too coming in, but like now that you've gone through kind of like the whole exercise that we've done with fixing up your behaviors and whatnot, like, I don't know, like if you're trying to explain this to someone who hasn't gone through the process, like, can there really be a big difference in how you answer your behavioral questions? And like, if so, like, I don't know, can you just like elaborate on that a little bit? Like why? Because I mean, how different can your story be, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a massive difference. And I think this has become more apparent to me because I'm trying now to help as much as I can people who are going through this. So I've been giving mock interviews when I can. And there's a club in my school that has like a mentoring program that I'm trying to do.
You should only help the people that are not in the business school. I'm just kidding.
No, I actually, those are the people I want to help. I mean, I don't know if I'll be able to, but if I can choose, those are the people that I want to help because they need it way more. But yeah, no, I think there's a huge difference. I think you hit it on the head. And I was going to say it if you didn't, but it's difficult, right? Maybe as a function of ego or just knowledge. I'm not exactly sure, but you're right. You definitely don't feel like you don't have a good answer to tell me about yourself because you know who you are. And that's a simple question, right? But no, I think there's a massive difference between good answers and bad answers, as well as just really like any behavioral question in the first place, right? Like I thought that I was solid because I'm good at talking, and normally people don't like hate me when I'm around others. So I was like, all right, I'll be fine. But it's not like that, right? Talking can be a bad thing if I'm talking too much, which I actually do tend to do sometimes.
Yeah.
I think like how I would explain it to somebody who's about to go through the process is it's about creating succinct answers that answer the question, but also make you sound interesting. I think I had a little bit of help in my background because people are innately interested in, like rocket engineering stuff. So that was a little bit simpler on that front, but even within the like typical candidate who goes to business major, finance clubs, investment banking, you just have to find a way to. My goal always was to say something in the first 2 minutes that made them have a question about me in their head, right? Maybe they didn't always ask, but I wanted to just seem different, and I guess it worked pretty well. And that's also true for networking calls. I think I found a big difference, and especially because I talked to some students in the program, because someone asked me, we were talking about like referrals, and they asked me how I got so many referrals at different places, and I was asking them about what they were saying on their networking calls, and they were telling me that they thought that it was just very dry and just sort of like, hi, I'm a banker, hi, I'm a student, okay, ask me questions. And I told them that I tried to immediately set the tone in something significantly more like friendly than just being this sort of like information receiver in relationship, rather more so just like actually person to person relationship. And the way that I did that was when normally the call is like, hi, how are you? Right. And most people just say like, good, how are you? I tried to talk as long as I could about how I was doing, how my week was, how my day was. And I found that like sometimes, right, I'd be like, hey, Sam, is now still a good time to chat? And you'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, okay, great. How are you? And you'd be like, good. How are you? And then I would just be like, I'm doing well. My week's been busy. I just got home, hanging out with my dog, hanging out with my mom, whatever, just had midterms. And then if it's whatever, right? And then they normally reciprocated that. They normally would answer with, even though I already asked them how they were, after I was done talking, they would be like, oh yeah, it's actually been kind of busy here, but today's a slower day. And immediately that sets the tone, I felt, is to something significantly more personable rather than just like I said, like this information relationship more so than a human one. So that's a big piece of advice I would give. Yeah.
Dude, that is gold, man. For anyone who's like actually listening to this, like actually Christian is giving away some really, really good stuff. That's awesome. And I think you're right. Like people tend, especially like students that are recruiting for banking for the first time, which by definition is almost every single person.
Yeah.
They've never had to do this networking thing before in their life. So I mean, like up until this point, like when did you have to network? Like never, right? And it's not something that they teach you how to do in school, but you just like learn through whatever you read online. Wall Street was like, oh, you got to network for investment banking. So then like people start like making it into this very forced and almost like robotic thing of like, okay, like I think what most people do, in fact, is they'll have a list of like 10 canned questions prepared going into the networking conversation. In fact, every networking conversation, they'll ask the same 10 questions, right, in the same order, and they just go down the list. And it's just like, I always say like that's not a conversation, that's interrogation, right? And you don't want to do that. Like nobody wants to be interrogated. And there's no, I like the way you described it, which is like making it more of a human relationship. Like you're trying to build rapport and you're trying to, I mean, networking and interviewing is it both comes down to the same thing. It's like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to get the other person to like you as a
Yep.
human being.
Yeah.
That's it. That's like it's as simple as that, right? And like I think always, I mean, look, maybe we're making it sound too easy. Like there's a lot more that goes into it, but regardless, though, I think you make a really, really good point there. And by the way, we've been talking about networkings and behaviorals, and the two are kind of like tied together, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what most people don't realize about behaviorals too is that how good your behavioral answers are will affect how good your conversations are.
Yeah.
And that'll affect like how much the person likes you, and it'll affect how likely it is that the banker will refer you. Like very rarely, if ever, will a banker actually start grilling you on technical questions during networking conversations. Like it has happened in the past, we have seen it, but like it's rare.
Right.
Right. And so like a lot of people, they spend all their time studying technicals. They don't barely spend any time on behaviorals because just like you said, it's like, oh, I can talk about myself all day, whatever. And then they're wondering like, why am I not getting any referrals? Well, it's because like your story is kind of boring.
Yep.
Like your story sucks.
Or you're boring, right?
Yeah. And it's like, and I think like, you know, I know you were trying to like explain why it's hard to realize like what you need to do on the behavioral side. I think, yeah, some of it could be ego, like you said, but like, I think a lot of it is actually just because there is no right or wrong answer when it comes to your behavioral interviews, right? And so it's not black or white. It's not like your technicals where you know whether you got it right or wrong. It's a lot more open-ended. It's almost like instead of grading a math exam, you're grading like a final paper for your English class, and everyone's going to have a different paper, but that's like a bit more subjective, right? And the key there is not just like, is your paper right or not? It's like, is your paper better than your classmates' papers? Like you're getting graded on a curve. And I think the other thing is like most people don't know how they actually stack up against their competition, right? Like you know what you want to say for your behavioral answers, but most people have no idea what their competition is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you be confident that, and if like I asked 10, if I polled 10 people and 9 of them are like, yeah, I think my behavioral answer is pretty good.
Yep.
Then like, how do you know who's actually the best? Right? Most people just don't. And then they just go in the interview and they just hope like, oh, hope this works. Like, and that is not, it's going to work for like 1 or 2 out of the 10 people and not for the rest.
Yeah. I think the mock seat thing was actually very helpful.
Mock interview hot seats. Yeah.
I think you should stress it more when you talk to people because it's really helpful. And it's one of the big things my dad that like stuck with my dad is just being able to watch other people interview. Because it's useful to mock and that's fine. And I did that with a couple of the students. We would just, like set up our own thing and just go mock or whatever. But I think it might even be more useful to watch other people do it because like you said, you figure out not even necessarily like how you rank in terms, because I never went into it with like a mindset of like I'm versus you. More so just like what are things that are, how did you structure your answer that I thought was good, or what kind of things in your background did you talk about that I could maybe talk about in my background. Like you talked way more about this thing. Maybe I should do that. That was very charismatic. Or maybe like your answer, you just talked and it was boring. So how do I not do that? Or even things like, how quickly are you talking, or what's your voice tone like? What are your facial emotions like? Stuff like that. It's hard to get in a void where you're just like staring at a computer by yourself.
I think those are all great points. And yeah, like for those people are probably like, what the heck are they talking about right now? It's like mock interview hot seat is this thing we do in the program where we'll give people mock interviews and everyone else can actually like observe, right? And everyone else can like hear the feedback and hear like the coaching on the spot as we're like critiquing people's answers. And to Christian's point, like the reason why that's powerful is one, yeah, it can be an eye-opening experience. It can help you really calibrate where you're at relative to the competition. But like a lot of times you're going to hear someone answer a question way better than how you're answering right now.
Yeah.
And then that's like the wake up call is like, oh wait, I thought my answer was pretty good, but actually like this, like there's another level to get to. Or someone that does poorly and you're like, okay, that's also valuable because you learn what not to do.
Yeah.
But like most students have not been on the other side of the table like as an interviewer yet. And so like you just don't have that level of knowledge, but like by being able to observe so many people do mock interviews every single week. Yeah, we do like at least 1 to 2 of these every single week. And it's like, it just builds up like this, I guess, almost like subconsciously, even like a repository of like what to do versus what not to do, what works well, what doesn't work well, what do I like, what do I not like, if I were the interviewer, right? And so I think that definitely is one thing that it's hard to do that unless you have a community that you can do that with together, right? Cool. So I mean, like, I guess one last question for you, which would be, I mean, because we've talked a lot about, you know, like what you did before, what you did after. Obviously, you know, you got a great outcome. So like now that you're on the other side, is there like one piece of advice that you have for people who are maybe recruiting now or about to recruit? Maybe something that someone told you at some point along the way that really helped you tremendously that you want to pass down to other people?
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a billion things, but I think in retrospect, something that really no one talks about online is, and this works both in a behavioral and a sort of professional sense, which is the importance of the team that you're on. I think that this isn't stressed enough. So I think that finding a team that's interesting to you and something that you like not only will flow through in terms of your excitement and your sort of overall demeanor, as well as your interest in what you're doing. And people can feel that, right? They can feel it's people have good bullshit sensors, right? And people know when people are being disingenuous. So genuinely being interested in something is really powerful. And if you can let that come through in an interview, people will like you because you're interested in what they're working on, but also in a professional setting, right? Like working for like just different teams or different calibers across the banks, right? When I came in, I thought it was just like, there's this like rigid ranking ladder and like you sit somewhere on it. And not only have I realized not to get caught up in any of that because it's so stupid, but also like, you know, the team you're on matters way more than the bank that you're in. I mean, of course they're related, but yeah, I think like for instance, the tech team that I'm joining, like half of the analysts left for Megafunds this cycle, right? It's like they've been hiring a lot of people, stuff like that, like really big contributors to why I made my decision. As well as the fact that I just really liked everyone on the team. We all got along really well. After I did my super day, I got a call 3 hours later from the person that I had chatted with the most there. She told me that I, had my offer. They gave out 2 offers that day. And they also accelerated me with their diversity candidates because they were doing the recruiting later. And yeah, and then with the next couple of days, I got like 6 calls from a bunch of different people that I had talked to or interviewed with, just asking me to come. And yeah, I think that the biggest piece of advice I would say is find interesting people with an interesting team in terms of content that you like, and it will bleed through and having positive effects in every other part of the application process.
Yeah, that's great advice, man. I mean, I think that the team is super important. And you're right, it's people are always so focused on like what bank I'm joining, but actually what most people don't realize is that within each bank, especially at big banks like Citi and Goldman, all these bulge bracket banks, like it's actually you're joining the group, you're not joining the bank. Like when I worked at MS Tech, like I pretty much for the most part just worked with people in the tech group. Like I don't work with anyone else like outside in the other groups. And so like MS Tech was really, really good, but I'm sure there were some other groups at MS that maybe weren't nearly as good in their specific niche.
Yep.
And that's ultimately what determines how good of an experience you have. And then like also like that's going to be like 95% of the human interaction that you're going to have in terms of like who you're actually dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And so people ask like, oh, what is like Morgan Stanley's culture? Well, like to be honest, every group inside of Morgan Stanley or inside of Citi or inside all these banks all have different cultures.
Yeah.
Because they have like different senior bankers and different personalities and different work-life balance, different everything, right? So it's like, yeah, like I mean, I think the only thing is like, look, if you're applying for like a regional office, it's a bit easier to be targeted about the groups. Like for those of you that are applying for like New York offices, like you kind of there is that randomness in terms of
Yeah.
you get the offer, you have to go through group placement, and you may or may not end up in a group that you like. But even then, there are things that you can do through the group placement process to like try to navigate your way towards the groups that you want. So yeah, I think that's a great point. It's really, really important. Glad you brought that up. But cool guys. I think there's been a lot of good stuff in this conversation that hopefully you guys could take away from. But if you're still recruiting right now, or you're about to go through the recruiting process, maybe you are also not a finance major, maybe you're studying something that's totally not related to finance, you don't have a finance background, and you're just looking to basically like go through the process as efficiently as possible and like be able to narrow all the information out there down to just like only the most important parts and only like the most relevant and useful information, so that you're not spending all this unnecessary time doing stuff that may or may not matter. Then I want to encourage you guys to reach out and book a call with our team. You can do that by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street is abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do is actually like what will most likely happen is you'll probably hop on a call with one of the alumni from our program first, who's already successfully gone through the recruiting process. And you can ask them whatever you want about recruiting, about their experience in the program, just anything, right? You can have a quick coffee chat and just get some advice. And then like after that, if you're still interested in working with us, they'll be able to set you up. And if they think you're a good fit for the program, they'll be able to set you up for a follow-up call with one of our lead advisors, and they'll be able to like learn more about what you need help with and how much help you need and whether we're actually a good fit to help you. And if so, like walk you through exactly what that might look like. And even if we don't think we're the best fit to help you, because like honestly speaking, like we don't have the bandwidth to work with every single person we talk to. So we are somewhat selective, but like at a minimum, we'll give you some advice on what we think you should do, regardless of whether you work with us or not. Okay. So if you're interested in that, again, go book the call at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. Again, the streets abbreviated to ST. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. So with that said, Christian, I want to thank you for spending so much time to talk to us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. And you made a lot of good points. And for those of you that like, went to just listen to this whole interview just now, like you probably tell like Christian's a very just like analytical and thoughtful person. And so I think he has a lot of good insights. And so hopefully you guys enjoy that as well. And again, also, like I said at the beginning, I feel like you've added tremendous value to the Wolfpack as well, which is what we call it. And so I want to thank you for that. And yeah, man, it's just been a pleasure working with you. And I mean, not that this is the end, I'm sure, we'll continue to talk and like whatever questions you have as you approach your summer internship and even beyond. Just don't be a stranger. We're always here to help with whatever you need. So
for sure. Yeah. I had a good time too. Thanks for talking. And I'm happy to talk to anyone during those chats as well.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate that. So guys, that'll be it for this episode. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. And until next time. All right.